Well, thanks, and thanks, Ollie, for the very generous introduction. I'm giving away my age as well. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Um, it's I'm going to be walking through some questions with Peter. We're going to talk first about the public success side of life, and then we're going to talk about private grief as well. And Peter's characteristic openness will be shared here. Peter, I just want to open up really by asking you what inspired you to become an entrepreneur in the first place. What got you there? What got that business person going?
Yes, okay. So there are really three elements to that. One, my father was a dental surgeon, so we had a good upbringing in the 60s and 70s. But the dental surgeon, which is probably pretty much the same now as GPs are, they have to hire staff and fire staff and do a bit of marketing and have customers and have premises and have insurances and have accounts and everything. So all this was done within the family environment. So my mum did the accounts and my father was in business with his two brothers. So there was that going on at home. I didn't really notice it, didn't take much notice of it, etc. But it still must have embedded in my life there because the books are out on the kitchen table. Then when I went to between school and university, I had the opportunity to go to Australia, and I got a job with a guy who became the most famous entrepreneur and explorer in Australia, a bit like Branson is here, a guy called Dick Smith. At the time, he had just had one business. By the time he'd finished, now, at least I met him in Australia last year. I hadn't seen him for 47 years. He's now the name in Australia for those things, not just being an entrepreneur, but also being an explorer. So some of that his enthusiasm, his madness, his independence, and all the rest of it will have rubbed off on me. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And then finally, at the end of my first year at university, I, with a friend, bought a travelling discotheque. So this is a couple of turntables, a lead of records, some speakers. This was in Cambridge University, and we went around doing gigs. So this is sales, marketing, difficult customers, tech equipment breaking, all the various things, collecting money, doing accounts. So at this point there, I wouldn't say the die was cast, but it was pretty clear to me that at some point I wanted to be entrepreneurial.
Yeah, and of all the many successes business-wise, what stands out to you as a success you're really most proud of?
Yeah, well, there's two elements to that. I'm still entrepreneurial. I still have the small publishing business you can see here, which I've co-founded with Alan. We'll talk about that later. I've still got Cam Data, which in fact my wife Lise runs now. Alan did before he died, but Lise does that now. It's 41 years old actually in December this year. Lots of ups and downs, some of those mentioned in the book. But I wouldn't say, and the various other businesses, property businesses, building houses from scratch, all kinds of property refurbishment, losing money on some projects, making money on others, etc. As any entrepreneur does. There aren't many that will just always make money. You can't, even the system doesn't happen like that, does it?
No.
So, but I don't think I've ever been a particularly successful entrepreneur. There are many Cambridge Angels, that people in this room will know, who have had very successful entrepreneurial journeys. But I've been moderately successful. I've had a good living, or even a very good living out of it, but never generated a lot of capital out of that. But I've had huge amounts of experience, much more than any other of the Cambridge Angels I know. Companies going bust. The cash is so tight that the bailiffs are turning up. There aren't many Cambridge Angels who have been through that process. And so that experience has been extremely useful in helping and mentoring others.
76 investments, was it?
Well, we've just come to that at the moment. Yeah, of course, plenty of those have failed. So I sort of accidentally moved into angel investing about 15 years ago. 16 years ago, I invested in something that was, I was mentoring the person actually in Cambridge, and we formed a little company and we sold it to a Cambridge company called Redgate. And because of that, I got into the Cambridge Angels. And there are actually two founders in this room, William and Yusuf over there, one of my very first investments, and I was on their board for 14 years. So if you take, there's two elements to this. There's the business I've founded or co-founded where I've had 25 to 100%, and then there's the business I've invested in, the 76 or so. So if you add those together, you get about 90 in total. And those 76 I've had between probably 0.5% to start with and perhaps 7 or 8%. And they're a totally different set of journeys. Yes. There are some great successes in there, some great learnings, and some great failures.
And let's talk about the angel investing experience a little bit, because it's very personal, isn't it? People don't always register that, but it's a very angel investing's. It's about a relationship, right?
It is at the end of angel investing in the same way as it is with VC. The crowdfunding is not, of course. This is just people investing in probably a video and some words on a website. So I'm not.
We don't do that.
It's a long spectrum. That's not me at all. Now, I do say in my first book, Invest, it's a good way to get involved in angel investing to start with. You won't lose very much money. You can see from the fora on that particular investment what the sophisticated or more knowledgeable investors will be doing and asking, and you can start to understand that. Now, if you move further along at the far end, before I will get involved in the businesses. So I was on the board and chair of Plumis for a long time. I'm on the board of PocDoc, where there's Kieran there, who's the scientific co-founder of that. In fact, Bruce here from MMC is an investor in that. We're on the board together, the three of us. So the bit I've really enjoyed has been the people I've worked with. Now, I have actually been financially successful, and I've been very open about these numbers in the same way as I have about the rest of my life, which we'll talk about. And so had some really, really great financial successes, but by far the biggest success has been the people I've worked with.
Yeah, and some very financially successful investments too. I think you did 100x on one.
Yeah, it was 107 times my money. Now, I must say, this was a couple that came to the Cambridge Angels wanting some advice and experience, really, entrepreneurial experience. And they didn't really need any money. They'd just about got to product market fit. And I just said, I'll help you only if I can invest as well. So they sold me 3% of the company for 7.5K, not much money, didn't make much difference to them. And we sold that. I got 800 and something thousand out of that after 6 years.
Very nice.
So that was a multiple. That's great, but that wasn't to do with that. And that's obviously useful because that paid back all the money I'd invested to date at that point, which is the dragon, as the VCs call it. But it wasn't that. It was how we grew that business, how we enjoyed growing that business. That was the really enjoyable part.
Yeah. And for those that wonder what angels kind of bring to the party, what do they mainly bring to an entrepreneurial venture, do you think?
Well, obviously they bring money, and no business can grow without the money. And there's nothing actually wrong with pure money.
But it's not
all the money needs to be smart money. But generally, unless they're second, third, or fourth time entrepreneurs, having some experience there at the same time can be extremely important, because all entrepreneurial journeys, as you know, and all the people in this audience will know, is fraught with mistakes and errors. And if you can reduce those errors, the chances are you're going to get a better outcome.
Yeah.
And so it's the grey hair or equivalent, not in your case, you're doing very well, despite your age. The grey hair will help tremendously, the experience. And that has helped many, many people. I've been on about 40 boards, of which 15 have been not-for-profit, but 25 have been for profit.
Yeah, so it's that added value of experience that you're bringing. I want to talk about health now. 3 years ago, you were told that you had an aggressive form of stage 4 cancer. Since then, you've run 47 parkruns, 4 half marathons, camped on the Antarctic Peninsula, and completed a number of travel expeditions to far-flung places. However, you start the book, and it's a great book, by the way, by recalling the moment you were given that diagnosis. How did you feel and cope in that moment?
Yeah, that was really tough. So a little bit of background. So 3 years ago this month, I ran the Cambridge Half Marathon, not knowing that I already had about a dozen tumours inside me. And the cancer I have is a non-small cell lung cancer. It's the biggest killer in the Western world. It's not the most common cancer, but the biggest killer. But I have a variant about 1 in 5 of us have, which of people who don't smoke, have never smoked, not even, had the definition is less than 100 cigarettes in one's life. And for the people like me, it's very rare it's picked up early. I have a friend who was picked up early because she had a skiing accident and they did an x-ray of her chest and it was picked up early. For most people, it's picked up very late. In my case, it was only picked up because the tumour in my brain had just got big enough to start affecting my balance. So 3 weeks after the cancer, after the half marathon, I found I couldn't cycle any longer. And I would sort of stagger a bit as I was walking. So I could still run, but couldn't walk properly. It explains that to some extent in the book. And that would then trigger me going through the medical system, initially private, and then going into the NHS, where they did tests in the way that you'd expect them to do tests, to the point where they found the brain tumours, but we were told that it's unlikely to be primary brain cancer, because primary brain cancer, and some of you may know, some people who've had that in the room here, is pretty quick death sentence, even now, as things are obviously getting better. But it wasn't. It was a secondary, and the secondary to a lung, plus other tumours as well. So you can imagine at this point, I did the thing that I just so strongly recommend people don't do, is Google it. It's too easy to Google it, isn't it? Dr. Google will have the answer. But of course, you get, as we've all done, we've Googled symptoms, haven't we? And we've ended up with thinking we've got something that's probably much worse than we've got. And I did that and got all kinds of pretty negative stuff. But there's still the possibility that it could have, most of us will have heard of people who died quite soon after a cancer diagnosis. And so that first month, when I was getting all my affairs in order, running around, just trying to do stuff, see friends, see cousins, visit the country with Lise, this was a really intense time. I was also on a very heavy dose of steroids, which was to do with reducing the swelling in my brain, which then allowed me to at least to walk in a straight line, but it had all kinds of psychological effects and massive weight gain, up to 15 kilos in about 6 weeks, etc. So I was mentally a mess. There's no way I could have sat on the stage when I was at that stage. So it was really tough. And Lise actually wrote the first chapter from her own experience, that first chapter, based on what she experienced. You'll see that. And that's really an introduction. And then from there, the book goes backwards and then pulls forward again.
And in the book, Peter, you talk about treating your cancer like a project. Now, even knowing you for a relatively short time, that didn't surprise me. But I guess, could you share with the audience, how you've been running this particular project in the last 3 years?
In fact, it started, I have a YouTube channel called Project Cancer. I put that out after about 9 months, when I realised that initially I did it just for family and friends, and then I put a password hidden webpage on my website so people could look at it, so I didn't have to keep answering WhatsApps or phone calls or whatever. And then I decided to go public, and it's called Project Cancer. But the project originally was called Project Lifespan. Now, the reason I say that, and this is explained in some detail in the book, there's a difference in all of us between lifespan and health span. Your lifespan is the point where you die. Your health span is the point where your quality of living means that you're not enjoying life as much. And people, you recognize this in your parents and grandparents, I'm sure everybody in this room. And at that point then, lifespan was much more important to me. I didn't really care what my quality was. I just wanted to get my life long enough, because of course you can't fight any disease if you're dead. You've clearly got to be live.
So extension was the first.
And so and that Project Lifespan evolved over a period of time. It's only, of course, with hindsight, and obviously with research and talking to other people, I realised what elements there were to that. And this were things like communication, working with the NHS, prioritisation. I have a bucket list and I have a fuck it list. Things like this. Things like this, which were really important. And I've written those up in the book for the help of other people. Lots of research. But the other thing, which is really important, and you sort of mentioned it earlier on just then, was that compared with some of the other tragedies in my life, this is actually quite an easy one. I've got a level of control over it. I've got, actually, as it turns out, a lot of level of control over it in terms of my attitude, my diet, my fitness, the research I do, the other nutraceuticals and so on I take. So this is something I've just got to work very hard on. Clearly, the outcome for it is actually life-giving, isn't it? It's life extending. So the more effort I put into it, the more quality of living I should get out of it.
Yes, and how do these doctors who you take the latest research to what do they make of their patients?
Yes, I've built a bit. Actually, Lisa and I have just been to see my oncologist today, because very quick bit of background. It mutated a year ago, so after 18 months, radiotherapy sorted that out. It mutated again this summer. and metastasized badly as well. So I've got about a dozen new tumours with a new mutation, which the original therapy, which is a daily tablet, wasn't combating. So I've got to move on to something else. And this interim period has been very, very messy. I might look okay at the moment, but 2 or 3 hours ago I wasn't very good. I'm needing morphine every night to sleep. I'm having a lot of weariness. I'll completely crash out after this event. Just adrenaline's keeping me going at the moment. And so yeah, working with the NHS. So yeah, it was interesting because of course you don't want to seem like a smarty pants. You don't want to seem like that you know more than the oncologist, because that relationship will never work out. So you've got to, and many people, of course, and people also in this room will have been through this sort of thing where they just hand their life over to the NHS. They're the expert. They should know what they're doing. So, and which I have done to a large extent. But at the same time, I'm super curious, inquisitive, data-based or data-driven at least, and so I do want to do my own research. So I will come up with discussions. So when we were talking about the new treatment, there were 4 different therapies he talked about, and I produced this 4-page research paper and emailed it to him before we went to see him, which he was fine with. This is 2.5 years into the journey, of course, so he's got used to me as an individual. He's mentioned in the book a few times he read the book to check, or read the draft to check that it was okay, the medical terminology was okay, etc. And he's fine with that.
He's become your proofreader.
Yeah, it didn't change much, did it? It didn't want his surname in there. That was the difference, but obviously that doesn't matter. So yeah, I have a good. It's not a. We could never become friends. You know, he's been in lung cancer for his whole working life. He's in his early 60s now. I would guess that 90% of his patients have died, maybe more. Yeah. It's been a killer for a very long time. It's only in recent times. And using this AstraZeneca drug, osimertinib, which I've been on for 2.5 years, it's been life-changing, literally. There are, prognosis 10 years ago would have been 6 months with my late stage. Yes. So he's having to learn also how patients are coping with these new therapies.
Yes, yeah. And you said just now, Peter, that obviously going through cancer has been difficult, but it's not difficult compared to some of the other challenges you've faced in your life. And we're moving into the private grief very much side of the conversation. You lost your younger brother David when he was 21, and in the book, you describe the unbearable pain of losing Alan and David and Ian. Sorry. Some people here will remember Alan. I met Alan early when he was writing the Invested Investor. I spent a whole morning with him recording a podcast, and it was a lovely experience. And I think, like all of us, we were deeply shocked and grieved by his suicide. Yeah, and then obviously 13 years before that, you'd lost Ian as well, and that's not an experience many of us have to face. As father, I think you can't imagine it. I just want to ask you how you think you've got through this.
Yes. So there are 2 chapters in the book, one about Ian and one about Alan. The one about Ian, and that's now 15 years since he died, is much more detailed. It's much more detailed because I think anybody who's reading it who knows somebody, or possibly, certainly, knows of somebody. Jed, of course, knows many because of his professional career, can learn from that, learn how I've done it. Everybody's grief journey is different. We've all had grief. We've all lost grandparents or parents or whatever, siblings perhaps, etc. And I didn't want in any way to be prescriptive or give a set of rules or guidelines. I just wanted to describe how I coped, and I'll mention that in a moment. In Alan's case, it was only 2 years ago in 2 weeks' time. It's too recent. There are 2, his widow is obviously still heavily grieving. We're all heavily grieving, including people in this room. And so all in that chapter I do is explain how I used my previous experience to cope with, you know, not submerging the grief completely. Many people do that. The way I coped with Ian was to, because of the way I'm built, I wanted to know the how and the why. And so I spent quite a lot of time on the how, particularly as the police thought foul play might be involved, and they couldn't find the people he'd spoken to at the end. So this was down in the Bristol area, so I spent a lot of time down there. So I got the how, and then the why I worked out just from over a period of time, understanding his life. He was very, very spiritual, and well, we haven't mentioned it yet, but his mother died suddenly 3 years before, almost to the day, of a DVT that had spread to be a pulmonary embolism. So he was obviously grieving for his mother, and really believed very strongly in the spiritual life, more strongly than the physical life. Yeah. Something that we can't understand, of course, but that's classed as mental illness, to take one's life at the age of 23. Yeah. But in the end, my narrative, and I'm happy with that narrative, it took several years to build, and it sits there inside me, in my soul, in my heart, and I can revisit it, but it doesn't consume me with grief, is that he died happily. He made a choice, a positive choice to do that. Yeah. So I built a narrative for Alan. I'm not going to say what that narrative is. It would be wrong to do that. It won't be the same narrative as other people who are grieving will have built up. But it has meant that I could not get over, clearly, but I could package that away, because I'd met Lise 9 months before. I got the cancer. Alan died about 10 months later. And we're now another 2 years later. After that, I wanted to get on and have time with Lise, time with Lisa's children, time with my remaining son, and friends and family, time to travel, all the other things I wanted to do without being consumed so heavily that I would just be in, deep depression for that period. And that does seem a bit strange. I'm sure people look at me and think I'm a bit cold or something, but it's the way my mind works, and the way it worked really well for me. But the chance of necessarily working for somebody else isn't the same. So what it is, this book is how I've coped, and then hopefully from that, some people can take some ideas from it.
And you talk in the book about the role that kind of, you call it work or projects and things to throw yourself into, played a really important role in just giving your life sense after these two bereavements.
Yeah, particularly the first one. In fact, when Ian died, I was, how long ago? I was mid-50s then, and I was involved in a lot of things in Cambridge. I was chair of a drug and alcohol rehabilitation charity. I was working on a property project for the Citizens Advice Bureau. I had a tech business. I was just starting to get involved in the Cambridge Angels. I had already investments and everything. So I found it quite easy at the time. Now, easy is totally the wrong term, I'm sure, to distract myself away. Now, what that will have had an effect on, of course, was to bury the grief and then take longer to work its way through. Much more aware of that the second time round, 13 years older, had a lot more counselling, of course, as well. So that was a very different matter. Those first, we were in, Lisa and I just disappeared off for our very first big holiday after the cancer was diagnosed, and we were actually in Ecuador when he died. So we came back, and so we had our diaries were clear, of course, for 6 weeks before we were supposed to come back, and we went back to South America for 6 or 7 weeks, about 3 months later. So we had time to, I didn't distract myself then, I just got on with all the various things that one needs to do. So it was a very different experience. I didn't have the things to distract. So distraction is something, when we talk about my alcoholism, distraction is something that I do use, there's no doubt, and I'm sure many people in this room will use that as a method of anaesthetic. What's really important also at this point is that I didn't pick up a drink. I'd been sober for 9 years, and if there's a reason to pick up a drink, the loss of a child must be the ultimate reason.
You didn't. And we spoke, you spoke in the book, and we spoke before a bit about the concept of post-traumatic growth, post-trauma growth, which, and just be good to share a bit of that.
Post-traumatic growth is something that many of you probably haven't heard of. And it was actually at the conference in Slovenia when Jed and I first met, though we'd met on the phone before that, that it was mentioned by more than one person or speaker. So there are various levels of support, of course, for people who are grieving in the suicide and many other mental health sectors. And you've got the counselling services, you've got Paris, which does quite a lot of that with telephone lines, but also does a lot of policy work and a lot of education, particularly for workplaces. And then you've got the International Association for Suicide Prevention, which is research, academic research, policy making, and the legal frameworks as well.
Yes.
And Jed said that committing suicide still is an offence in some countries. There's a lot of work to be done there. So, obviously, you kind of, the punishment is on the survivors, but it's still an offence to take your own life, which clearly it hasn't been here in this country for about 60 or 70 years. And so it's that I heard the concept of post-traumatic growth. We've all heard of PTSD, of course, post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic growth and its opposite, which is post-traumatic depreciation, are technical terms, but they are used by the not just academics, but also the counselling industry to explain and help with moving on from trauma.
Yeah.
And although I don't think I've done this officially, and I don't know how I've done it, but I'm confident that the alcoholism recovery back 25 years ago and Ian's death, I've somehow grown in a way to help others because of that. I can't explain any more than that.
No, thank you. So thank you for that, Peter. I want to touch briefly before we bring Elise in a few moments, just about that period in your 30s, mid-30s onwards, where you struggle with alcohol. And I think, when you mentioned that you didn't turn to alcohol after you gave it up, but I guess what did you learn from those years with alcohol?
Yeah, there are two. The book it's an undertaking to read, as you can imagine. There's quite a lot of sadness. It's hard work to read, and it takes 5 hours or 6 hours. Though I've heard of somebody inhale it, which means they probably just read it straight. I've heard of somebody read it in the bath, so usually a very cold bath at the end. But generally, it takes time. So the learnings we're particularly interested in sharing are lived experience of cancer and of alcoholism, and they're actually separated out into 20-minute reads on the website, so anybody can download those, and we're spreading the word through social media, etc., maybe into nursing, teaching, medical teaching, and so on. The lived experience of cancer, of course, is not at an end yet, and I don't know what the end will be. Obviously hoping that I'll die of old age at 90, unlikely, but we hope that. But of course, with alcoholism, I can go through the whole process, and that describes the descent, the banging along the bottom, and then hitting the bottom, hitting the rock bottom, as they call it, and then the recovery from that process and how you cope. I mean, when one is in a strong addiction to something, and alcohol is not the only one. I mean, tobacco is one as well, although that's not as damaging to other people around one as hard drugs or alcohol. But if you just take, I'm going to just talk about alcoholism. When one's in the depths of alcoholism, there's only one thing in life. You wake up in the morning, it's where to get the drink and when to drink it, try and get to the end of the day. And there's only one love. You only have love of one thing, and that is the alcohol. There's nothing else at all. Everything else is irrelevant, family, kids, partner, everything. So once that all goes, there's a lot of time available for other things to be done. And that was the start of me getting involved. Once my head cleared up, which took a year or 2 years or something, getting involved and using that time efficiently. And that's why the chapter's called The Lost Decade, because although I wasn't drunk solidly for that decade, because I was still a functioning alcoholic and I was still running a business and I'd still see the kids occasionally, and I did have a girlfriend at the time, very patient girlfriend who would see me when I was sober, but it was still lost. There was so much more I could have done with that decade.
You still did more than most of us, I think, Peter.
I don't think I did. I don't think I did. I don't think the book says that either.
I just wanted to thank you, Peter. I just wanted to turn to the process of writing the book alongside Lise, who's with us here. Most of us struggle to tell our partners and the difficult things that we think they would find it difficult to hear. And in the book, you share everything, and including lots of details about earlier relationships as well. And what was it like for both of you as a couple going through writing this together? Lisa, it'd be good just to bring you into the conversation properly. Lise, welcome to the stage. Yeah, so you met Peter 3 or 4 years ago. Within sort of like a very short time, he'd been diagnosed with a serious illness, and then Alan died. And then you're writing a book together. What was it like doing this as a writer, working with a husband, working with these really big, difficult issues? How was it for you?
It was a roller coaster ride, and it was really hard. And in the beginning, I wasn't sure I was going to do it at all, because I thought I'm too close to this. It won't work.
Yes.
And also, I wasn't sure I had anything to offer, because he's an amazing, intimidating man. Think, well, what can I bring to the game? But actually, I had a lot to offer, because I've worked with words all my life. I'm basically, I write all the time, and thought, yes, no, I can actually help here. Yeah. So, and Peter he's a data, he's a bullet point man. He really wants to do everything in spreadsheet, bullet points, done, dusted. And I thought, no, we need, if we want to bring the message across, people have to want to read it. You have to engage people. You have to be vulnerable. And that was another important role. He's very sort of fact-based. And we were able to we had some really tough conversations where I just tried to delve deep into really painful areas of life. Yeah. But to get it all out on paper, because what's obvious to Peter, said, well, that's not obvious to the reader. You need to explain how you're feeling. You need to explain what you're thinking. You need to literally put words to it. So I was able to help with that, I think. But that was a hard process. We had some tough conversations. But I think it's a better book for it. So I was able to, I did some of the writing from scratch myself. Yes. I did a lot of editing of Peter's writing, and I tried to bring it together as a complete piece. So introducing some structure into it, a narrative flow that hopefully people will manage to get to the end of it without falling asleep. But I think, but the story is so compelling that that's not really a difficult job. So that's how it was for me, I think. Yeah, it was difficult getting diagnosis after 9 months.
It's very early in your relationship, really.
Very early in the relationship. But there was never any doubt in my mind. I just felt this has come on my path. I've chosen to, start sharing my life with this man, and it's come on my path, and it's something I can do. I can walk alongside him in this hard journey of cancer, and see, I can be useful. I can help, and get fulfillment myself from that. Quite frankly, because it's almost a privilege to be able to do that for someone. I mean, that sounds maybe a bit weird, but it does feel like it. Yeah. So, and then when Alan died, that was a moment where I said to Peter, I'm not quite sure I can do this. It's too much. It is just too much. But of course, we can all do more than we think we can. Yeah. And sticking together, we got not through that, but because we're still going through it, but we're managing to do it. So sorry, I'm whittling on.
No, it's fine. It's all. Peter, thank you, Lise. Peter, any thoughts and reflections on what you're hearing now from Lise?
All news to you.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. I mean, I did start writing myself. I knew my writing wasn't going to be good enough. I really, really wanted Lise to write it. The previous 2 books had been ghostwritten effectively by Kate Kirk. Some of you might know that name. She wrote the Cambridge Phenomenon books in Cambridge. And so I knew I couldn't be the writer. And it did take quite some, I wouldn't say convincing, I don't think it was convincing, I think leading Lise through to the point where she wanted to be initially just Peter Cowley with, I think it was until Peter Cowley and, so it became a co-author. And if you do read the book, you'll find that it's, and you don't know my writing anyway, but you can imagine if I write functional specifications and quotations, it's not going to look the same as a book that flows well. And everybody says it's just so readable all the way through, particularly despite the difficult topic. So it was really good. I mean, it was tough. I mean, there were times when stuff was being dragged out of me, not because I was concerned about what I was thinking about. Somebody did say that I'd find it cathartic writing the book. At the time I said no. As it turns out, it was yes, but that yes was because of the way that Lise pulled out the emotions. Because of course, nobody wants to read just a calendar list of all the things I've done, you know, positive and negative, where I've been on holiday, whatever. It needs to be the emotions and how I cope, particularly about the crises and the tragedies. And Lise did the most phenomenal job of that.
Yeah, it's a beautifully written book.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Lise. Final question, then we're going to open up for the audience to ask questions. Peter, we know things are getting harder now. You alluded to that before, and you're starting to turn your mind towards the later, particularly last days of your life. How do you want to be remembered?
Yeah, so just before we talk about that, I'm both extremely realistic and really optimistic. You know, I think you probably all know that now from what you've heard. And the realism means that I've been using the statistical evidence from the various trials and feedback from the use of the drug. The drug I've been on, about probably 500,000 or 600,000 of people have been on. This AstraZeneca drug, it was their best-selling drug for several years, in the billions of dollars a year. And and they're desperate to try and extend the life of the patients once it stops working, as are other companies. So the fourth generation, which I'm hoping to go on in a few months' time, is another company. The second generation, unfortunately, I've had to go back to, is another company. So there's a whole industry working on this. But that means there's loads of data. And that data said that I would have probably about 2.5 years. It would go wrong after a year. The progression-free survival, or time to mutation, they call it, and then you'd die about 18 months later. That 18 months and the 18 months is up in a couple of months' time. So I worked on that being realistically what was likely to happen. Obviously subject to medical technology advances, and those are happening the whole time, and the fourth generation is exactly what seems to have happened. So, but to be realistic, and of course it's a bell curve, and there are people in the long tail at that end, but there are also, unfortunately, people, I don't need to call that the short tail this end, people who die quite soon. There's one guy there's a couple of very big Facebook groups with people with the same mutation, and there was a guy in his late 20s who died within months of diagnosis. And there are people who've been on the tablet for 10 years in the States, so, you know, as you'd expect. So I did a lot of planning.
I'm going to pull you into how you want to be remembered.
Yeah, because you don't want me to rush them. They need to ask some questions. Anyway, so I've done quite a lot of work on that in terms of making sure I've built memories over the summer. And this is partly what your answer. So I've spent 4 months just spending time with close friends, traveling. Ben Nevis, the guy called Robert Sampson, some of you'll know him. Spent some time in Belgrade, cycled from Vienna to Budapest with Lise. So this is the remembered by the close friends and family. Obviously, I can't do that with everybody. I'm not close with everybody anyway. But then if you take the longer term, post my death, how I want to remember my legacy is a combination clearly of, well, mostly what effect I've had on people in helping on their entrepreneurial journeys over the years. And there are a few people who will definitely bear witness to that in this room. But also what I'm leaving behind in terms of my writing, which will then help others. And there's the business side of it, the 4,500 books or whatever that Investor, and the 40,000-50,000 listens to the podcast. One of you're on one of those, and there's maybe one or two other people in this room who have been on those podcasts. Actually, William and Yusuf have been on, haven't they? Yeah. And then there's the new book. And the new book I wrote, I mean, a lot of people said to me, look, terminally ill. What on earth are you doing sitting down writing a book? You know, I haven't got better things to do, like sit on the beach or something like that. But it hasn't. I was so driven to get this down in a way that would spread the word. And this comes back to what Ollie said later on. This is all about spreading the word, getting it out. There's about 550 books so far have been sold or given away. I have a target, as you read the book, of 600, because I think it took about 600 hours to write between Lisa and I, and that's an hour per person, and the sort of mentoring I would do with anybody would be an hour, therefore. But of course, that's just the lower limit target. That's the, whatever you call it. So it's getting it out there and people being inspired in some way or learning from how I've coped with these. So that's really how I want to be remembered. I mean, I'm not going to write my own epitaph, though I must say, when Ollie was speaking earlier, sitting there, I thought, this is my eulogy. or that and what was said by Jed as well. I thought, oh, dear, sitting at my own funeral here.
I think the book, you know, those of us have read it. I think we've all probably taken different things away from it. I think, you know, I think what I've taken from you, Peter, from the book and just from our other conversations, I'd always wondered in my life, how would I cope if certain things happened that haven't happened, but if they did, and not really had an answer, frankly, been very fearful of those things as a consequence. And I think seeing how you have faced into the things you have, and the way you've turned that into something valuable and positive, and the fact that you've survived it all is very important for me. And that's you know, took loads of things. I've become an angel investor because of you, but you know, but I know, I've lost loads of money. But on that level, I think I can cope better with whatever life throws at me because of what I've learned from you, and I think we've all taken different lessons from your life. So if you haven't read this book, bloody well read it. It's really, really amazing.
I just add something very brief to that. So at the back of the book, Shirin actually and Frog Capital asked me to write a letter to my 29-year-old self some time ago, and I did that, and you published it on your website, and I published in the 3rd edition of the first book, and it's on my website. And that then triggered me to write a letter to my 19-year-old self. This is all about business and being CEO and all the other things, all the mistakes one made to do with accounting and firing and hiring and all the rest of it. But the 19-year-old self is about other things. And the back end of the chapter is, the final chapter is letter to my 19-year-old self. And Lise, there are 12,000 words of outtakes that Lise let through lots and lots of anecdotes I love, which weren't appropriate, shall we say. No, I don't mean they're inappropriate because they were rude or anything like that. It's just lots of, you know, just wasn't right, and they wouldn't flow right. And I totally respect Lise for having the delete key at hand. But because I have control of the website, I've actually put the whole the lessons learned, it's called. I put all 10 or 11,000 words of those on the website. So, but thank you,
Very
Craig.
good. Well,